and I'm here today to give you a look back 12 years later of the lessons learned from the book, The Next Common Sense. 12 years ago, when we wrote this was a bestseller. But the question is, does it apply today? We had a dozen lessons for managers in The Next Common Sense. They ranged from the global. How did we look at the world? Was the world complex or merely complicated? We suggested that managers needed to be focused on guiding interactions rather than leading entities. We made a big deal about the need for simple principles and for the need to respect mental models of yourself and of others and of all of the participants in an organization and its culture. We suggested that the world would be best served if you looked at it via landscape metaphors, that innovation was the result of combining and recombining things, and that one needed to pay attention to the multiple roles of self, client, customer, etc. within the organizational ecology. We went on and suggested that it was very important that one focus on trying to be a canyon rather than a canal. Why? Canyons guide rivers, and canals try to control them. We suggested that it was very important in an organization that you tell stories rather than merely using labels, rules, categories. That if you wanted to be innovative and resilient, that you needed to send scouting parties out to probe the environment. That when they did those probes, you needed to pay attention to road signs because they were pointers along the way. And our final lesson was about the importance of words. That words and how you use them had a great deal of impact throughout your organization and throughout your organization's ecology. So today, we will look back, one at a time, and examine how well those lessons have held up. Our first lesson concerned the idea that much of the world is actually complex rather than complicated. Now, the roots of these two words tell you much about the difference in meaning. Complicated has as its root plic, which is to fold. Things that are complicated can be unfolded to find the one surface that contains the answer, or the lesson, or the simple principle that actually works, regardless of the consequence. Complex things, on the other hand, their root is plex. Plex is to weave. If you attempt to pull at or unfold things that are woven, you unwind them completely. The actual meaning is lost, and instead of dealing with the whole, you are dealing with meaningless parts. Our conjecture 12 years ago was that the world was getting ever more complex rather than more complicated. It is our assessment 12 years later that we were right. Complexity is the guiding principle in today's world. Our second lesson concerned the role of managers. Most management texts, most MBA programs teach managers that their role is to be leading. They are to be setting the vision, setting forth what it is that people are to do, set forth the purpose, set forth the goals. We suggested that in the 21st century, management would be more about guiding interactions, trying to help people understand how better to interact to accomplish an organizational goal, how to better react to circumstance, environment, and situation. Again, looking back, we believe we were correct. Guiding interactions is a much more important role for managers in the 21st century than attempting to be the forceful, autocratic leader. Our third lesson concerned how one dealt with simplifying the complicatedness and the complexity that the manager faced. It was the old common sense that what you did is you narrowed down to a local situation and just tried to sort things out. We suggested that it would be the next common sense to step back, adopt a more global viewpoint, and allow whatever interactions were going to take place to happen. On this lesson, we were wrong. The reality is you need both. You must deal with local situations. You must try to sort things out, but it is important to do so keeping in mind the global viewpoint and keeping in mind that you cannot control the many interactions in the environment. Our fourth lesson concerned mental models, the ones you use, the ones your client use, the ones the members of your organization use. It was our understanding and our observation that throughout much of the 20th century, managers and managerial techs gave lip service to the idea of difference, and instead they created many incentives for conformity. We suggested that in the 21st century it was important to recognize that people have different mental models, that the mental model of your customer may not be the mental model of you, that the mental model of your supplier may still again be different. Here, we believe we were right. As the 21st century winds on, it is becoming more and more important to be able to respect the fact that others have different mental models than you do. The manager who fails to take that into account must resort to coercion in order to get his or her way. Respecting mental models is an important lesson for the 21st century. Our next lesson, or principle if you will, was the importance of landscape metaphors, ecological metaphors. We were like many other authors in suggesting that this was going to become the dominant theme of the 21st century. Well, we were wrong. In fact, we were dead wrong. The dominant theme right now seems to be networks. Computer networks, communication networks, all kinds of social networks, social media. These are not landscape metaphors. These are not organic metaphors. These instead are network metaphors. And network metaphors are what is important today. Our next lesson concerned how one goes about being innovative, creative, and resilient. Our observation was that in the 20th century, parts of organizations, of teams, of things, components, should be segregated and should be attempted to be treated as their own self-sufficient wholes. Some of the key bywords for this were the matrix organization, the modular organization, the idea that things could stand alone. We suggested that as the century wore on, people would be asking far more about how parts from one place and another can be combined and recombined to create new and better wholes. Here, we were again half right. In a networked economy, modular things have a role. Recombining things has a role. Resilience is about a combination of recombination and modularity. In this century, one needs both skills. The next lesson was a very important one. In the 20th century, it was politely suggested that this was the era of the organization man. And even as the century came to a close, many companies worldwide were insisting that the company come first. We suggested that people had multiple roles. They were part of a company, they were part of a community, they were part of a family, they were parts of many things. And that if one allowed people to be themselves, they would be more productive, they would be happier, they'd be more resilient, and that resilience in turn would carry over to the organization. Here, the economic stresses of the past few years suggest that we were both right and wrong. When economics allows, allowing people to be themselves is important. It does create resilience. It does help. But the sad truth is, when economics are stressed, insisting that the company come first, that economics come first, seems to still matter a great deal. So on this one, we were half right and half wrong. next lesson was about how much control one wanted to have in an organization. And our byword for this was, be a canyon, not a canal. In a canal, for a river, one attempts to control both the outcome and the processes. In a canyon, instead, there is an overarching landscape through which the river is free to roam. In managerial terms, this means guiding viewpoints, not controlling actions. It means specifying outcomes without trying to specify the process by which those outcomes are reached. It means allowing people with their multiple roles and their many mental models to work paths out for themselves within a set of boundaries that the manager puts down. It's our observation that thus far in the 21st century, we were dead on. One needs canyons. When one attempts to impose canals, danger lurks. Perhaps the most recent examples of this are Tunisia and Egypt, where dictators successfully for 30 years imposed canals, and where the populace is now looking for the freedom of a canyon. The next lesson was our most important one, and that was one should attempt to be telling stories and not merely relying on labels, rules, and categories. For management consultants, the old way this used to be expressed was that they would provide bullet lists of conclusions and then demand that the employees or the organization fill in the necessary details. The opposite of this is to tell a story. You provide a meaningful context, you describe the boundaries, and you allow employees to draw their own conclusions based on their mental models, their roles, their history, their context, etc. The 21st century is the century of story. Labels and rules are great for efficiency, but labels and rules get in the way when there are more degrees of freedom needed. Stories provide the necessary degrees of freedom, and stories will be a byword for the next 90 years in this century. Our next two lessons probably should be looked at as one, which was to create resilience and innovation in an organization. The organization needed to be sending out scouting parties to explore the environment and needed to pay attention to the road signs that were encountered along the way. If we were using the ecological landscape metaphor, that language would make sense. Unfortunately, we were wrong on the metaphor. So, what does this lesson mean in a networked economy? It means one needs to be aware of who are the connectors. One needs to start to find a way to pay attention to weak signals that may become more important later. One needs to step back and take a look at the network and the networking that is going on. The network is not the message, but the network may provide keys to understanding the message. Here, we were right, we were wrong, or we had the wrong metaphor, but scouting parties and road signs have their metaphor in network hubs, in connectors, and in the very boundary objects that link various parts of a network together. Our final lesson we overstated, and that was the importance of words. We went on about the fact that managers, bosses, tend to assume that words have the meaning the boss gives them, which may or may not be true at any given moment, and that instead words derive their meaning from the context in which they are spoken. Well, again, we were right and we were wrong. Words are very important, but in truth, context is most important. Words are merely symbols that allow us to interpret context, to see the opportunities that are present, and to communicate with one another about the situations we are encountering and the places we would like to go and the resources we need to get there. Words are important, but people are actually wiser than we gave them credit. Words and their differences can be overcome, but they can only be overcome with stories, not with labels, not with rules, and not with algorithms. So how do I conclude? the lessons from the next common sense. In general, I would give us a 60 or a 70%. We did pretty well 12 years later. Our main lessons about telling stories, about context, about the need to be a canyon and not a canal, hold true. About the need to respect mental models, about multiple roles. We got the metaphors wrong. We didn't quite understand the importance of the networked economy, which 12 years ago was but a shadow of today. But, looking back, we still would politely suggest that for a manager, the next common sense still makes a lot more sense than the old common sense. I'm Michael Lissack, and thank you for joining me today.